Hello and welcome. My name's Tim and I would like to introduce my brand new company, Zorza. Not Zorza, Zorza. Actually took a little bit to get used to that myself. There's a little bit of a story there, but probably for another video. If you know why it's pronounced the way it is, maybe you want to leave a comment below, help with the algorithm. In the meantime, Zorza is going to be a system integration company with a bit of a twist. That means that I'm going to build PCs, but the twist is I'm going to be doing it on YouTube for you guys. The problem with building PCs for a living is that the profit margins are not that high, which means that if I build a computer for $2,000 and I try and sell it for $3,000 with a 50% profit margin, I'm not going to be very competitive. Now, I can build a superior computer, but it requires a little bit of knowledge on the part of the buyer to actually realize that and understand the value. So my hope is I can build a computer and make a video of it and sell the computer that I will be building for the video to someone who will find value in that experience. So basically what I'm saying is, I want to build something for you that would cost too much in the first place and then charge you even more. Because I want to do that, I want to build a premium experience. And I want to build you a premium computer. And this is going to be the very first one, my very first video. And on that note, I do need to warn you about the quality of this video. You'll definitely notice some issues with the lighting, the sound quality, even the focus. It's been a learning curve, but I'm getting better. With any luck, this will be the most affordable PC I ever build. So this is a previous generation build, mostly just because I bought the components almost a year ago. It's taken me that long to get this all up and running, to get to where I can actually put together a computer and a video for you. Sort of a proof of concept here. We're gonna see if anybody's interested, see if actually getting to watch your computer being built is of value to anybody. Once this is done, I'm gonna be putting the computer up for sale, probably on Craigslist for this one. I'm still working on the website, so I've got to get that all sorted out. Gonna be kind of an auction style. I haven't figured out exactly what that's gonna look like yet, but I'm gonna put the listing up for about a week. I'll have the exact dates on the screen for you, and at the end of the week, hopefully I get it sold. Probably looking at about $3,000 for this computer. I'd like to get at least that. That is probably real close to good value there. I might be a little more than it's actually worth, but we've got some pretty premium components in here. So if I sell it for that, I'm not going to be getting even 50% markup. But what I will be getting is a $3,000 GPU for one of my later builds. So help me out with that, please. Hello and welcome to Zorza. My name's Tim and I will be your PC builder for the inaugural build of the Zorza PC Builder channel. I'm going to start by going through each of the components and showing you what we've got, what we're going to put in the computer, and what kind of performance we expect to get out of them, the advantages and disadvantages potentially of each thing. And we're going to start with the motherboard. So this is the Asrock Steel Legend X670E. This is AM5 motherboard, which means that this is compatible with the 7 series and now the 9 series AMD chipsets. This is a previous generation board. The new boards are going to be the 800 series. So essentially what we're going to find out is that the difference between this board and a similarly priced 800 series board from the same manufacturer is going to be 2 USB-C ports. Now, these are very fast ports that are missing on this board. However, most people probably do not have any components that can take advantage of the speeds that are available through those ports. All right, so motherboard itself, and some accessories. So we've got a Wi-Fi antenna. This is a Wi-Fi capable motherboard. Some Asrock cable management, front panel connector wires, a couple of extra standoffs, owner's manual, and this I'm kind of excited to try. This is a stabilization bracket for the GPU. This is a nicely packaged motherboard. Some foam protection here, good to see. So this is a nice example of a pretty decent mid-range motherboard. We've got nice VRM heat sinks. We've got the AIO shield already installed. This one has a 5th generation PCIe slot for the graphics card, and also a 5th generation M.2 slot for your storage. So we're going to put a 4th generation M.2 hard drive on this build. For most people, this is going to be more than adequate. Chances that you actually have any need for Gen 5 is very slim. If you're not copying very large files frequently to your hard drive, you're going to get very little use out of a Gen 5 drive. Some extra heat, maybe a little bit of additional performance, but not enough that you would notice in any capacity other than the time it takes to actually copy a very large file. All right, we're going to use this. This is a Samsung 990 Pro SSD drive, 4th generation NVMe. This is a very good drive. This is more than adequate for our build. Probably just a little more than we could actually justify putting in this computer. We're going to put in a Ryzen 7 7800X3D. Again, kind of going with our theme for last gen. For the previous generation for PC gaming, this was the best chip you could buy. And at $350 at the time, it was a hell of a value for that experience. This is still more than adequate. The differences that you would see between this and the current generation CPUs are not that much. There is some difference for productivity, but for gaming, the only real difference you're going to see is at 1080p. So if you're a professional player, yeah, you want the latest generation. But I'm sure there's still a lot of players still playing with this one. This is a fantastic CPU, but for gamers, unless you're running a 4090 or a 5090, you're really not going to see any benefit above 1080p. Only very few games are going to be CPU bottlenecked with a GPU 5080 and below. For most of those games, a GPU is going to be your bottleneck, which means that you could run a much slower processor and get exactly the same gaming experience. I'll put a link to a great hardware unbox video in the description that'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. All right, and we've got GSkill, Trident, Z5, Neo, RGB RAM. This is 6,000 megatransfers per second, CL30 RAM, which for AMD CPUs, this is the sweet spot for price to performance right now. All right, we have a Zotac gaming amp, GeForce RTX 4080 Super for this build. Again, sticking with our theme for last generation. And to cool our CPU, we've got an Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. This is a 360 millimeter AIO RGB. Should be fun, should look nice on our computer. One of the quietest per cooling potential AIOs we can get. And finally, we have a Be Quiet Dark Power 13 850 watt PSU. This again is a little overkill for our build, not wattage wise. There's some headroom on the wattage, but it's not overkill. But this is a A-tier rated unit on the PSU Cultus tier list, and this is 80 plus titanium rating. It's a very efficient power supply, and it's also very quiet. I've built a few rigs with Dark Power 13 units in them and have been very happy so far, so we're going to go with what works. Alrighty. And we're going to put all of that in the Lian Lancool 216 case. Should be fun. I can't wait to get started. All right, let's get this build started. So the first thing we need to do is update the BIOS on the motherboard. So for that, all we actually need is the motherboard, the power supply, and a USB stick with our new BIOS on it. Luckily, Asrock actually makes this very easy. On the website with the download for the new BIOS, if you can find it, it's the hardest part for me, was actually very clear instructions. There's a PDF that's very specific on how this is done. You have to download the zip file with the BIOS in it and unpack it. You have to rename the BIOS file and put it in the root drive on your USB stick, which basically means when you get into the USB drive, it should be right on top, not inside of any folders. So the first thing we need to do is get the power supply plugged into the motherboard. Before we start, we want to make sure that the power supply is off. So, fun fact, the on and off symbols on a switch are binary. 0 is off and 1 is on. And we have the 0 depressed, so we are currently in the off position. The only thing we actually need to plug into the power supply is the 24-pin connector here. Want to make sure that's plugged in firmly and the clip actually latches. Same on the PSU side. Once we have that plugged in, and we're going to plug in the PSU, and we're going to turn it on. Got some nice RGB going on this motherboard. Wasn't aware of that ahead of time. Looks all right. We'll play with it once it's in the case, see how it looks, see what we can do, see what colors we like. The USB drive is going to go in the port closest to the BIOS flashback button right here. So once the stick's in, you press the BIOS flashback button, hold it for 3 seconds, it'll begin to flash, and when it stops flashing, you can pull the USB drive back out and shut down your power supply, and we can start putting in the case. Also, just for safety, it's a good idea after you turn your power supply off to let it sit for a few minutes at least. We'll give the capacitors a chance to discharge so that you don't get shocked, which can happen even after you turn it off. Luckily, due to the magic of film editing, you do not have to wait with me. All right, so we're going to build in the Lian Lancool 216. It's not a budget case, but it was a pretty reasonable $100 case. Pretty excited about it. It's rated pretty highly. Big fans in the front, which means they move more air for less speed, and therefore they're a little quieter. Quiet's kind of a theme with me. If you're wearing headphones, maybe you're not sensitive to it, but I am. I prefer a computer you can use in a quiet room, not disturb anybody. This is going to be that rig. So let's see what we got. All right, so we have a captive thumb screw at the back holding the glass on. That's nice. Little piece of metal here to push against for leverage. Nice frame around the glass. A couple little tabs to hold it on the case. Gonna set that aside for now. All right, we have a similar situation on the back here without a captive thumb screw to tighten down to lock it on there. That's on there pretty solidly right now. Similar tabs on the top of this thing to hold it on, a couple on the sides as well. Hopefully we can get those wires tucked away when we're done so they're not pushing on the back of that. All right, a couple more captive thumb screws here. These two are holding this top cover on, I believe. Yep, there we go. We'll get that off there, I hope. There we go. Not sponsored by iFixit, but pretty excited about these tools. If you're interested in a precision tool set, you should go check it out. All right, so we have just a standard Phillips screw right here, not captive. See, that should allow that to come off. I'm not sure we need to remove this for the build. In fact, I think it's likely we do not, but it should make it easier for me to see what I'm doing. All right, and we're going to go ahead and put that screw right back in where it came from so we don't lose it. Okay, now that we've got this stripped down a little bit, we're going to set it aside and bring out the motherboard. We're going to start with the CPU, a Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. Believe it or not, this is all pretty simple. Going to be careful not to touch the bottom of the CPU. Nothing but contacts on the bottom of that. We don't want oils from our fingers on them, or anything else for that matter. So we're going to unlatch the bracket that holds down the CPU. In this particular case, this Asrock board has a little triangle marker to show us the orientation of the CPU on the plastic cover on top. So that is right here. We're going to go ahead and open this up. There's another triangle in the top left corner here. And we are going to take our CPU, which has a similar little triangle marker in the corner, and we're going to make sure that those are in the same corner. We're going to be careful not to bend any of the pins, not to create any force whatsoever that isn't evenly distributed by the entire CPU on the pins. And once we're pretty sure that's situated correctly, we're going to close it down. That black cover is going to pop off as we put this in here. And we have an installed CPU, just like that. All right, next we're going to put in our NVMe drive again. Samsung Pro, good drive, well rated. This should be pretty simple. This is going to go under this heatsink here. This is our 5th gen slot, so this is the one we wanted in. All right, we've got 2 little screws to loosen to get this heatsink off. I'm going to set that aside. Actually, we're going to check. Okay, so we do have a thermal pad on the bottom of that, and it's covered in plastic, so that plastic has to be removed. So we're going to take our NVMe drive. It's keyed. There's a notch. There's a notch on the interface. You're going to set that in there nicely, just nice and lightly. This one took a little more effort than I'm used to. Needs to be in there sufficient so that the notch at the other end of the drive does not overlap the screw hole for the heatsink that we're going to put on it right now. That lined up pretty well, but that is not the easiest one I've ever played with to get on there. Not terrible though. Those screws need to be snug. They don't need to be tight. While we're here, we're going to go ahead and pull some plastic off of this motherboard before we forget about it. Got a couple pieces on there, keeping that camouflage pretty. Good chance I'll be wiping some fingerprints off all this before this is said and done. All right, 2 down. Next, let's go ahead and put some RAM on here. For this, you want to consult your build manual and make sure you're using the right slots. All right, on this particular motherboard, we're going to use slots that are named A2 and B2, which are going to be the 2nd and 4th slots away from the CPU. On the RAM, if you look closely, you can see that one side is longer than the other, similar with the slots that you'll be pressing them into. Looks like these are closed by default. Going to line it up straight up and down. Support the bottom of this motherboard while I'm doing this. And you press it in until it comes back up and latches. So there's one. And there's 2. All right, now it's time to set the motherboard aside and get the case back over here. In addition to the case itself, we have a box of toys. So, the case has some interesting features, one of which is an additional fan bracket that can be mounted to the back of the case. If you want an additional exhaust fan on the back of the case, you can use that. Not sure how practical that is. Probably not going to use it on this build, but it's available if you're interested. You can always add some more color to the back of your case if you want. All right, this case comes with yet another anti-sag bracket. We got one with the case, we got one with the GPU itself, and we got one with the motherboard. So I think we're covered here. We have an owner's manual and a box of screws. And an additional backplate for something. Not sure what that goes to. Probably not going to use it. In addition to that fun box, which came with the case, we have an optional accessory that we ordered for this one. This is an additional set of front panel USB ports, along with some controls for the RGB. I got this for 2 reasons. First of all, a couple more USB ports can't hurt, especially if they're on the side. So if you're setting the case on your desk, nice easy access right there. But also because this has this cutout right here for this thing, this control set. And I think the way it is, it looks pretty funny. I think having something there kind of justifies it. So we're going to go ahead and get that added. Also, I think it's pretty cool. This is interchangeable with this part up here. So if you prefer to have the power button and the headphone jack on the side, and the extra USB ports with the RGB controls on the top, you can switch them out. All right, and this front panel should just pop off of here. Yep, there we go. Looks like we've just got a couple little Phillips screws holding this on. Some nicely tightened Phillips screws holding this on. Route this inside the case. I'm going to pre-bend these cables just a little bit, bend the copper inside of the cables rather than where they actually attach to the connector, just so that we're not putting stress on that connection. Not any more than necessary anyway. You know, I've seen a number of reviews on this case. You'd think maybe somebody would mention that tight fit right there. All right. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to get some of these cables attached before you put the motherboard in. However, I will be discovering that later, most likely. So, in the back of this case, there are actually a grand total of 9 standoffs that we can screw into to hold the motherboard down, if the motherboard actually has that many holes. 2 of them are actually a little bit longer and will protrude through the board. So as we set this board in here, we're looking to line this board up with these holes and potentially get it to just set down and settle in place so that it should be, you know, fairly secure before we even put any screws in it, as long as it's in this position. And when that happens, we should be able to look through and see the holes lined up. We'll know we have the motherboard in the right spot. All right, we're going to get this motherboard put in this case. But first, we're going to put on the brackets that will hold the AIO coolant pump on the board. We're going to start by taking these standard AMD cooler holders off the board. And we're going to get out our pack of parts from our Liquid Freezer 3. And we need brackets that are labeled L and R. We also need some standoffs and some screws. Each of the standoffs is going to go on the board over the top of the screw hole that the old bracket was attached to. We're going to attach the first bracket on the left when the AIO is also on the left. We're going to place this so that the L looks like an L so that we have the correct orientation for this. I'm holding the bottom of the bracket roughly in position while I just barely snug the screw on the top. And we can drop the bottom one in. If you're having trouble lining up a screw, you can always back it up till you feel it click and then go forward. And that usually will help you get that lined up the way it needs to be so that you're not cross-threading anything. Same deal with this bracket. We're going to place it on the right so that the R is in the correct position. Then we're going to go back around and snug those all up one at a time. No need to crank on it. Just snug it down until it's difficult to turn. And finally, we're going to go ahead and put this in the case. There we go. All right. Felt that pop down firmly. Now we need some screws. This is from our handy dandy little box of screws. This is where it's nice to have a screwdriver with a magnetic tip. Initially, I'm not going to snug these down, just getting them in there. Now I've got all these in. Just to be safe, when I come back to snug each one of them down, I'm going to count to 9 in my head and make sure I get to 9 before I stop. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 9. So when I snug these down, I'm not really putting a lot of pressure on them. I'm just using 2 fingers, and I'm twisting them to the point where I can't tighten them anymore with just the 2 fingers on a relatively narrow shaft. So I can't put a lot of torque on that, just enough. The next thing we want to do is get the cables attached to the motherboard. So looks like some SATA cables, some more SATA cables. Looks like some 8-pin CPU cables, gonna need that. Got our 24-pin cable, gonna need that. And here we have our 12-pin high power cable for our GPU. We're gonna leave that one aside for now. Getting a little pre-bend in this cable. And I'm gonna shove the GPU side through the slot. Kind of pull it down where I can reach it here. And it slides nice and easy when it's lined up correctly. And then I can pull the slack out. Make sure that's firmly latched. Our 2 8-pin. Gonna do similarly with this one. We get it through. Get it to where we can reach it from the bottom and hold on to it. Do our pre-bend in this one. Just fine to do this before you push it through if you want. And then once again we can pull the slack out as we get it positioned where we want it. Pressing it in firmly until we can feel it latch. All right, we're going to do that again. All right, we got that seated. One of those does overlap the other, so if you put them in separately like that, you have to look at it and make sure you put the correct one in first, in this case the left one. All right, so that's most of the PSU cables connected. All right, now we're going to look at the front panel connectors. Those are pretty nicely bundled right here. We also need to get these cables shoved through from the back here. We have our top front USB and USB-C connectors here. I'm going to shove those through here for now. And we've got our audio connection, as well as our on-off reset and the LED for the button there. I'm going to shove those through down here. All right, and then we've got a SATA power connector, a USB connector, and a male and female 5-volt RGBA connector here. This one's going to go through here somewhere. How about right there? And the rest of that we're going to leave to connect in the back later. All right, this one has got a tab in the middle on this side, not on this side. And there's a notch in the middle there on the bottom, so we want that tab to be on the notch side. All right, same thing with the top USB connector right there. It's got the tab on the other side to match the notch on the outside of the board. This one is different shapes on each side of the connector. Not sure that I can see which way that goes in, but it should only go in one way, so we'll try it one way. And if that fails, we'll try it the other way. I think we got it the first time. We're going to take these other two connectors and reroute them. This is not where I want them. I want these to come around underneath. Got a nice little cutout underneath the motherboard to route wires through. Right here we have one blank spot where there's no place for a pin. And on the connector down here in the corner, there's a spot with no pin, so we're going to line those up. And then for the front panel connector, we have the same thing. This time the blank is in the corner. That slides in nice and easy. That one's real easy to plug in offset by half a connector, so the audio one too, potentially. You have to make sure all your pins are actually inserted into the connector when you put that together. All right, next we're going to mount our AIO. Going to start by pulling this mount off the front of the case, which should make our lives considerably easier. All right, and we can set this aside for now. All right, this also comes with a little tool and some thermal paste. We're not going to use that. I've got some Duro knot coming from Thermal Grizzly, should be here, well, maybe even before we get this installed. It's probably a better thermal paste in terms of conductivity, and it certainly should be more durable. That's the idea. All right, this should be a pretty straightforward process. We've got the top of the case already pulled off. We should be able to put this right down on top here. It is possible to flip the fans over and have them pull out of the radiator, and then you can mount the fans themselves to the top of the case. You could flip the fans over on the bottom of the radiator and have them pull air through the radiator if you wanted intake fans here. We do have these really nice large intake fans on the front of this case, so I don't think we're going to do that. So in our little baggie, we have some coarse threaded screws for screwing into the plastic of the fans themselves. We also have some little machine screws with threads that match the holes on the radiator, and that's what we're going to use. And once again, we're going to start by mounting them loosely. We have, let's see, there's 1, 2, 4, 6, a total of 12 of these to do, so I'm going to be at this for a while. Once again, if you're having any trouble getting the threads lined up, you can always back it up until you can feel it pop into place. and then try again. Always a good idea to be gentle when you're threading screws in for the first time. It's not too hard to cross-thread something and cause yourself a problem. In this particular case, however, I think we'd probably be just fine with 6 or 8, 10 screws. You know, I don't know that we need all 12. And in fact, it looks like I may leave a couple of them off until we have this in the case and have it situated where we want it, because right now there's some play in the case. But if I mount these screws here, there's going to be substantially less play. And it looks like probably the same over here. Yeah, I think we're going to leave a couple of them out for now. We can always just put them in later. Looks like there's good access here. It's going to be right on top of the case at that point. Shouldn't be too hard. This pump comes with a little adapter cable. We're going to plug this in at the heatsink end. It's going to have 3 fan controller connections. One for the fans here, one for the pump on the heatsink, and one for the VRM fan that's in this unit right here. There we go. Look at that. And this other little cord already attached to the heatsink is the ARGB connection, and that's going to control lights here and here. We do have the option, if we want, of disconnecting the connection that runs down these sleeves, and we could connect the ARGB for these in separately if we wanted them controlled on a different port. Don't need to do that for this build, but it is an option. Set this tray in just the same way it came out, with the AIO attached. Got those snug back down nicely. Now let's decide on a final position for this radiator. And there's not really a lot of extra room here. I think we want to keep the liquid pipes, you know, some distance from the fan here in the front of the case. So I've got it set all the way towards the back of the case right now. And it looks like we're only going to be able to put 2 more of these screws in. But as I said, I'm pretty sure 10 will hold it. I will go ahead and send all the extra screws and parts that come with all of these pieces with the computer when I ship it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is apply some thermal paste and get this heatsink mounted. Got some Duronot from Thermal Grizzly. The cooling solution on this computer is more than adequate for this processor. In fact, definitely overkill. We're doing it for acoustics and aesthetics more than anything else. But what we want is some thermal paste that's going to last a while. Looks like instructions in every language known to man, and pictographs as well. Also got a couple of spatulas in here. On my computer, I didn't bother to spread out the thermal paste. Seems to be just fine, just did the dots. You can do the X. In this case, I think we're going to give it a shot, see how it goes, but no promise that that's the final solution. I think even that little bit's going to be extra, but we're going to find out in a minute. Such a pretty processor to cover in goop. I have heard that you have to press down pretty hard for this in order to get it to spread out nicely. And I would agree, that's been my experience here so far. Also, the very cool shape of this AMD processor is not making my life any easier. All right, well, if that heatsink is anywhere near flat, I think that's going to be more than sufficient. All right, next, and very importantly, we have to remove the plastic from the heatsink. All right, you can kind of feel when that thing pops down on there, on the mounting bracket nicely. Next, we're going to pull plastic off of the top of this heatsink. We need to plug in our cables. All right, so we have 4 leads here. We have the VRM fan, the pump, the fans on the radiator, and the ARGB. So I'm going to pull this top cover back off so you can see what we're doing here. It'll make my life easier too. Okay, once again, the cable labeled pump is the one that's going to go right in the corner there. You have 2 little raised slots on the back. Those are going to go away from you on this board, towards the edge of the board. The next one's going to be the one labeled fan. By default, that's going to run based on CPU temperature. It'll run the fans on the radiator. Then we have one labeled VRMs. That's the electronics surrounding the CPU, which the fan in that cover are going to supply with additional cool air. So we're going to plug that one in right here. This is just a chassis fan header. But if our BIOS allows for it, we can program the curve, the fan curve, specifically for the VRMs. On this one, the little slots on the jack are going to face towards me, towards the M.2 heatsink there, away from the top of the chassis. All right, I'm going to pop that back out of there so I can do a little cable management here. We're going to be doing a lot of this before all is said and done. And finally, we're going to route this ARGB cable up and out the top of the case, out the back. And I think we found our first use for some of these tiny little zip ties that come with the case. And then 15 minutes of cable management. All right, so one more neat little gadget we got for this build is a vertical GPU holder from Cooler Master. I did actually install this, but later I removed it because the Lancool 216 actually has a built-in vertical mount solution that I liked better. I am going to go over the highlights here just because this Cooler Master mount is pretty awesome and I want to make sure I don't skip any details for the final video. Alright, so we have a Gen 4 cable to go with this vertical mount, which means that if you upgrade the GPU at some point, you're going to either want to buy a Gen 5 cable or mount the GPU in the standard horizontal position. So this particular Cooler Master mount is pretty interesting. It's got a lot of adjustment. You can adjust the GPU so that it actually sits back a little farther if you want to play with how it fits in the case. And also, you can adjust it closer to the glass and farther away from the glass. I suspect we're going to want to go as far from the glass as we can. But we're going to have to play with this and see if this is even something we can use. That remains to be seen. All right, time for the best part, or at least the most expensive part. We've got a Zotac 4080 Super ZTU. It's a gaming amp model. And this card is not terribly oversized. It looks downright small compared to my XFX card in my build, my personal build. Of course, I'd be real happy to have an even fancier card. That's a large part of the point with these builds. We don't need them, but we sure like to have them. And now we have the final installation of the PSU, along with about an hour and a half of real-time cable management, all compressed into a little less than a minute. I did leave the trays for the additional hard drive mounts in the bottom of the computer, as well as the SATA connections to the PSU right there, ready to go. And finally, we're going to put Windows 11 Pro on this computer. I've got the downloaded Windows right here. We're going to go ahead and plug that in up here just for fun. Any USB port should work. Turning the power supply on. And here goes nothing. Literally nothing, since I don't yet have the monitor hooked up. So that looks good. We are going to skip this part. So initially, I'm going to be installing Windows 11 Pro on a local account. I'm going to bypass the Microsoft account setup. We're going to do some testing and make sure everything works right. We're going to run the computer a little bit, and then we will format the hard drive and start over. And we're back. So in the process of trying to get the RGB set up on this computer, I realized that I didn't have control of the GPU the way I'd like. The GPU does have software, but I'm just not happy with the way things are syncing up. Well, so in the process of trying to get that taken care of, I discovered that I need to add this. This is just a cord. This is not the right cord to connect the ARGB from the card to the motherboard. I didn't get that added. I was a little suspicious. I didn't see a spot for it, so I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to do that. We're going to get that in there. I'm probably going to have to get the right cord. But in the process of looking for this, I discovered this, which I had been looking for also. Need some help with my organizational skills, probably. This is the Lian Lancool 216 owner's manual. Has some pretty great instructions in here. Not perfectly clear, but you know, passable. But in the process of just kind of understanding how everything was wired together and what kind of troubleshooting the RGB situations that I've been dealing with, I discovered that this case has an option for mounting the GPU vertically without using the Cooler Master mount. Now, I like the Cooler Master mount in that it's stable, it's solid. And there's something to be said for that, especially if you're planning on shipping the computer, as we're hoping to do. So I've decided I'm going to go ahead and take the Cooler Master mount out and mount the GPU vertically in the case, the way the case is designed to do. And we'll see. We'll see if we can get it stable enough, secure enough. We'll see if we like it. We're going to find out. So I'm going to start by pulling the GPU and the Cooler Master mount out of the case. And every single time I undo this screw, I loosen the wrong one first. The one that holds the top on is right next to it. Now, in order to install the GPU the way Lian Li intended in this case, the first thing we have to do is rotate the PCI mount bracket 90 degrees. And the slots in the back were in the back. We're going to turn it so that they are now going to be in the bottom of the case. All right, so in addition to my iFixit tool, I'm just working with a 1/4-inch nut driver. It's a little bit easier to get some torque on things or to untorque things. All right, the next thing we need to do is get the PCIe riser cable mounted to the bottom of the case. So we're going to use some long standoffs that come in the box of parts from Lian Li. And these will screw right into the covers for the fan mounts on this. So I can see we've got 3 positions that this can go in. So before we go too much further, we need to see how it's going to look. I think it will work in any, but we would like to make sure the graphics card is far enough away from the front of the case so that it can get adequate ventilation. Yeah, we could even use the front slot though. I think we're just going to use the middle one. Okay, we're going to get this in position. We're not going to attach it yet. And it looks like... Alright. Good thing we didn't put that in a different slot. So that's going to go in the top 2 from this angle. So this is a switch for the dual rail system on the Dark Power 13. Not necessarily something that you need, but it's labeled as an overclocker. You might want to use it for that. And we're going to put a couple of slot covers back in. So with these slots mounted vertically instead of horizontally, the motherboard itself is actually going to be in the way when we're trying to attach the screws. When it comes to actually mounting the GPU, I might have to remove the fan just to have space to get in there. We'll see how this goes. Out comes the fan. And that's that. Except I also bought a fan. Lightwings LX, one of the newer RGB fans from Be Quiet. This is the low speed model with only 2 intake fans in the front and 3 on top and 1 in the back. I didn't feel like we needed the high speed model to evacuate the air. I am one of those guys who thinks that if you're on any kind of a budget for your PC, any money that you spend on RGB is money that you could have spent on performance. Now, in this case, while this is not an absurd money is no object kind of build, I will hopefully be building some of those, I intend to, but this is not that. But it is an enthusiast build. This is going to be a very high-end computer. You'll be able to play any game you want in 4K. If you want to plug it into your TV, use it in your living room instead of a console. I often do that here, have a wireless mouse and a keyboard, and I use it as a computer right off of my TV. I sit on my couch with my keyboard in my lap, and I do whatever I wanted to do on the computer. Social media, YouTube, check my email. Doesn't matter. In that kind of setup, in 4K, this PC will play any game that currently exists. There are maybe a couple of titles where you wouldn't be able to play on the ultimate, the ultra, the highest possible presets, but those are very few. And even those, playability is a matter of opinion. If you're playing competitive shooters, you're not going to be playing it in 4K anyway. So, not really an issue. A lot of other things look just fine at lower frame rates. It really is subjective. It's a matter of opinion. But this computer is going to look fantastic, even in 4K. Play whatever frame rate you want on most games. It's a matter of adjusting some of the presets a little bit. Maybe most games will play in ultra settings, the highest possible settings at 4K with good frame rates. It won't be a problem. If you wanted to build a better computer than this, you could spend another $200 on the processor. That might be pretty reasonable. And what we paid for the RGB in this PC's probably amounts to about 50. About 25 for the fan, maybe another 25 for the RGB versions of the RAM and the case and the cooler. So, wouldn't be enough to really get you much of a performance bump anyway. The alternative would be to spend another $1,000 on the GPU, which, let's face it, we all want to do that. In fact, I do this so that you all can buy me a 5090 GPU. That's it. That's why I do this. All right, so let's get started. This is actually super easy to do. We just have 4 screws holding this fan on right through the back of the case. We're gonna have to get into the back of the case to get that loose. If there's a downside to good cable management, this would be it. All right, well, this is what happens when you say something should be easy. Luckily, this particular case has some flexibility that's going to make this, well, possible. All right, let's see if that comes right out now. The more tricky thing might actually be getting the cable for this fan back into the back of the case. It is really that easy to do. And luckily that fan fits. I have heard that this particular case, this 140 mil fan mount right here is pretty tight. And I've heard some complaints about some fans not fitting. Really happy we're not going to have that problem now. All right, so we're just running a very coarse threaded screw into unthreaded plastic. So needs a little bit more force than the precision screwdriver is going to bring to it. Still going with the firm but gentle philosophy here. You could strip it out. Not really very likely. I mean, you know, unless you got real excited. We could close it up and call it good. But what we're going to do is look at adding an LED strip. So, the camera died. So, I went ahead off camera and switched this out for an ARGB strip that goes on the 3-pin header. The 3-pin header was plugged into this control panel here. I moved that around up here. So can't see it, I guess, on the video. But there's 2 headers there. We plugged the AIO into number 1, and I went ahead and plugged the controller into number 2. So now we just got this little strip to deal with. This one is nice because, oh, well, okay, very weak magnet. Okay, well, most of these have magnets in them. There we go, just not the one I demonstrated. So this is a Vetru strip. Whoa. Vetru LED strip. Just one of hundreds of different types of LED strips you can get off of Amazon. You know, this one I bought with the ARGB for an earlier build. Okay, I'm gonna put this so that it runs right across the edge there, I think. And of course, this is all experimental. We're gonna light her up, see how she looks. And now it's time to show you what this computer can do. We're going to run some benchmarks, starting with Firestrike Ultra, which is a 4K test for DirectX 11. And the results on this one are just a little above average.
Keeping in mind that the only overclocking to this computer has been the RAM timings set to their Expo settings. The CPU and the GPU are bone stock.
So the first one was 102.8%, so 2.8% above. Next we have TimeSpy Extreme. This is also a 4K test, this time for DirectX 12. And once again, we're just a bit above average. This time we scored 11,765, where the average is 11,645. So it's real close to 1% above average. So just a hair above average for this setup. And the last one we're going to run is Port Royale. This one is a ray tracing benchmark. And once again, just a bit above average. We have 18,613, and the average is 18,335. And that is 1.5% faster than the average. The next thing we're going to do is run just a little bit of The Last of Us. It's not really an ideal game. I don't really have an ideal setup to show you what this can do. My monitor is a widescreen 1440, so not much of a challenge for the GPU. And The Last of Us has an FPS cap at 60. So what we're going to see is, even with the settings turned all the way up, the FPS is going to be capped. You're going to see the FPS and the 1% lows basically capped at 60. You will see bit of a drop every now and then in the 1% lows, but the gameplay is fantastic. Perfectly smooth as far as I can tell, or at least as smooth as that game gets at 60 FPS. All right, so initially I had believed that I would need to completely format the main hard drive on this computer in order to prepare it for sale. But it turns out that Microsoft actually has a feature for this, and I believe it's going to be pretty secure. So I'm going to go ahead and run through that process. And if anybody knows different, please let me know in the comments below. If it's not as thorough as I think it is, or it's going to be problematic for any reason, please. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is go into settings. Okay, in settings, we're going to go under system, under recovery. We're going to click on reset PC. The first thing we're going to choose to do is to remove everything from this PC. We're going to go ahead and do the cloud download. And then we're going to go under change settings. This is important. And we're going to go to clean data. And this will actually clean up the PC. It'll remove all of the personal files from the PC. And then confirm and next. All right, and the way we've got this set up now, it says resetting will remove all of the personal files and user accounts on this PC, remove any changes made to settings, remove all apps and programs, download and reinstall Windows. So essentially we're going to wipe it and start over. All right, so we're going to go ahead and bypass the Windows account setup again. The first thing I'm going to do is hit Shift F10 to bring up the command window. And then I'm going to type OOBE/bypass NRO. And then we wait another minute while the computer restarts. And this time I have the option to click I don't have internet. We're going to accept the licensing agreement for Windows 11 Pro, and we are going to name this PC Zorza PC 1. Of course, you can name it whatever you like once it's your computer. And we're going to go ahead and leave the password blank and click Next. I'm going to turn all of these to no, except for the diagnostic data, which you can only switch to required only. So this is basically for any communication that your PC would do with Microsoft Corporation. Theoretically, you can limit it in the way that it shows you, but you can't completely eliminate Microsoft's connection to your PC anymore. So once you actually use your Windows account for anything, you'll actually be enabling other monitoring software on your computer, which you'll have to address as you see fit. All right, and there we have Windows 11 Pro installed. We have a little bit of software that we need to download. We're going to go ahead and use Microsoft Edge just to get these couple of pieces of software on the machine. We're going to start with the Nvidia app, and then we're going to do AMD Adrenalin. Looks like we're going to have to go ahead and delete our browsing data when we're done with this. And there's AMD Adrenalin. And the last one we want is the GSkill RGB software. Now that's just for controlling the RAM. At the moment, the RGB for everything else is set in the BIOS. It's just set to blue. I'm probably going to ship it that way. The RGB for the Zotac card is turned off. You need the Zotac software to turn that one on. The RGB for the RAM can be controlled with Asrock software, but I don't particularly like it, so I'm not going to ship the computer with it on there. But that's a good option if you want to control everything else, everything except the graphics card, including the RAM. That can all be controlled with the Asrock RGB software. But again, I don't like it, and you have to open it up every time the computer turns on. To sync the RGB on the RAM, you need to open some software. It can be the Asrock software or the GSkill or probably any number of third-party apps, but you have to have something to sync the RAM. Otherwise, you're going to get this nice rainbow color on the RAM. I have tried both the Asrock and the GSkill software. I think the GSkill software is just less, so less running in the background basically. Also, I believe you can turn either of them off. If you set the software to open up when the PC turns on, it should sync the RAM and then you can close it. But for now, I'm just going to go with what I believe is the lighter software. You can always adapt this to your own preferences. Okay, we've got everything downloaded. All right, I'm going to start with the AMD Adrenalin. Uncheck the Send Data to AMD button. So this will install the latest drivers for your AMD CPU. When you open up AMD Adrenalin, you have the option to optimize a few things for your gaming or other computing needs. And we're going to skip this for now. Our drivers are currently up to date. You can see that up here in the corner. So you can see as we installed the software, it went ahead and checked to make sure we were up to date. Our CPU drivers are all good. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And we're going to move on to Nvidia. I'm going to go ahead and put the Game Ready driver on this PC. It's potentially a little less stable, but we'll have the most current drivers for games. So depending on what you're actually playing, may or may not make a difference. You can always change it over to the studio version with this app. I'm not going to set it to auto optimize. Again, you can change your preferences at any point if you want to. And it looks like there's a new driver as of yesterday. So we're going to go ahead and download that. So we're going to come over here to the drivers tab and we're going to install the drivers. All right, looks like we've all got this all set up. We're all installed. We're going to go ahead and restart the computer. Now we're going to install the GSkill RGB control. And again, we're just maxing out on the blue here for now. You can set it however you like when it's your PC. We also need to make sure that Windows is completely up to date. So the first thing we're going to do is go into Settings, and then under Windows Update on the bottom left, we're going to come up and hit the Check for Updates button. I did do this earlier before the RGB and the GPU mount upgrades. So apparently when I did the reset on the PC, it kept all the updates in place or replaced all the updates that I'd already added. So the only two we got today were these two. We've got a Security Intelligence update and Microsoft Defender update. And that was all that was necessary for today. So Windows is completely up to date as of the 5th of August. And the last thing we're going to do is add my own personal background to Windows here. Of course, you can always change this if you like, but I'm going to add something for Zorza right now. So I've got a USB stick in this computer already with one picture on it. I'm just going to drag that over onto the pictures folder here and close that up. And we're going to go to Windows button, Settings, Personalization, Background, and from Windows Spotlight we're going to change it to Picture. And there it is. And there we go, the Zorza Windows background. probably the first of many. And just for fun here, we're going to go ahead and set the taskbar to hide. So you just right click on the taskbar, go to taskbar behaviors, and automatically hide taskbar. There we go. Personally, I don't like it like this. I find it kind of annoying, but I wanted to show off the Zorza brand a little bit here. You can always undo it exactly the opposite the way we just did it there. And that's it for the software setup. The very last thing I want to add to this computer before I put it up for sale, some stickers. So I have some Zorza logo stickers that we're going to apply to the hubs on some of the fans, maybe one over the top of this Arctic logo here. And I also have some vinyl decals that we're going to apply to the glass. So one of the things I need to do that are some alcohol and a rag. And this just makes sure that the surfaces that we're applying the stickers to are really clean, because stickers don't like dust too much. All right, we're just going to put one on the center fan on this card. Okay, we're going to do one on the center of this heat sink and VRM fan housing for the AIO. Going to do one on the back fan. Going to do one on just the center fan on the AIO radiator fans. And then we're going to do both of the Lian fans on the front. And that takes care of the stickers on the fan hubs. All right, next let's see what we can do about getting them on the glass. Once again, we're going to start with some alcohol here. Get us nice and clean. So this is just a vinyl cutout that I made with a home hobby cutter. I've never used this transfer tape before, so we're going to see how that goes. You may have noticed this is backwards on the back of the glass. Now this vinyl claims to be permanent, but with the caveat that it will come off. Might require a little bit of effort and maybe some acetone to clean the adhesive off the glass. But if you don't like it, you certainly can remove it if you want to. All right, and here we go. Well, let's see how it looks when we light her up. There we go. The first ever Zorza PC build is complete. Don't forget to check the description below for a list of parts in this build, a link to the listing while the computer's for sale, and eventually a link to the website when that gets up and running. Like, subscribe, or leave a comment if you want to see more of these videos and you want to help with the algorithm. And until next time, happy gaming.